What is going on, New York Giants fans? We are back at it here again with another video. Today we're going to talk about one of the best decades in New York Giants history and one of my favorite decades as a New York Giant fan, and that is the 1950s. And in the 1950s, we had 4 playoff appearances, we had 3 national title game appearances, and 1 championship out of those appearances. But it was a phenomenal decade for the New York Giants. We finished with a .633 winning percentage for the decade, one of the best, if not the best, decades in New York Giants history. So, without further ado, let's get to our tickets from the 1950s. And we come down here, and before we get started with the tickets, today what we're going to do is we're going to start with the 1950 season, and we're going to work our way through the decade instead of starting at the end of the decade and going back. We're going to start at the beginning of the decade, which is 1950, and work our way to the end. And like I said, this was probably the best decade in Giants history. We drafted in this decade Frank Gifford, Sam Huff, Rosie Brown, Joe Morrison, just so many good players in this decade's Hall of Famers, and just great players. We saw the end of the Steve Owen era, our coach for 23 years. Just a great time to be a New York Giant fan, and this is kind of what catapulted us, and just got a lot of fandom in this area. Unfortunately, the 60s were not as kind to us, neither were the 70s, but then we picked it back up in the 80s. But this is kind of where it all started and where it all began, so let's begin. We start off with 1950. In 1950, you have the Cleveland Browns as the NFL champions. Again, we had no Super Bowl yet, and we'll get to how the playoffs were set up a little bit later on in the video when I show you some of the playoff tickets. But the first ticket we have from 1950 is right here against the Los Angeles Rams. That was September the 7th. This is what they call the Fresh Air Fund football game, and you kind of see it on the ticket there. This was a game that was played annually. It was a preseason game, and against different opponents every year. Sometimes it was the Rams. This was kind of similar to the Bishop's Charity game that we used to play against the Packers. So that was the preseason. Now we move on to the regular season. October the 22nd, this game was at the Polo Grounds, which is where the Giants were playing their games at the time. Then we move on to a game down here against the Baltimore Colts, and this game was played on November 19th, 1950. And this particular game was one of the largest comebacks in New York Giants history, even to this day. We were down in this game 20-0, and we came back to score 55 unanswered points and win the game 55-20 against the Baltimore Colts. So this one right here, and I believe this was the Colts' first year in the NFL, if I remember correctly. So just one of the games that, is in the record books in Giants history. As far as comebacks are concerned. Then we move on to game number 6, right here, December the 3rd, at the Polo Grounds. And our last game of 1950 that I have is against the Eagles, right here. And the ticket, if you've been following the other videos, you've been seeing that the tickets are a little bit different than this one. So this is 1950. They even abbreviated December because it couldn't fit on the ticket. But this is at Shibe Park in Philadelphia, and this was our game against the Eagles. And like I said earlier, in 1950, we went 10-2. We lost to the Browns 8-3 in the playoffs. And then if we would have beaten the Browns, we would have used this gem right here. This ticket was made for the Giants. You can see their name is right on it. New York Football Giants versus National Conference champions, right? So the way the playoffs worked back then, before the Super Bowl, is you had a Eastern champion and you had a Western champion. There was 2 divisions. Whoever won the East, whoever won the West, played each other in the championship game. That was it. Now, if the teams in one division had the same record, you would play a divisional playoff game. So that's what this was right here. The Browns and us both had the same record. I believe we were both 6-3, if I remember. No, not 6-3. The score was 6-3. Then the Browns got a safety, and they won the game 8-3. So we lost 8-3 to the Browns in the divisional round of the playoffs. And then this game was never played because the Giants didn't make it. But if the Giants were to make it to the championship game, this is what the ticket would have looked like. So this is what they call a phantom ticket because the game was never played. But nonetheless, I think it's pretty cool. It's obviously full because the game was never played, but you kind of get an idea of what the ticket would have looked like if the Giants were to play in that game. So that's 1950, 10-2 season. Steve Owens coming to the end of his career. And now we get on to one of the most interesting and one of my most favorite things in this entire binder right here. This is the entire home schedule of the 1951 season. Every home game and all of the tickets are attached. If you look at the lines right here, they are still together as they would have come to you as a season ticket holder. And then you just separate them and you go to the game, right? You could see like right here, it's a little bit ripped. But I mean, not bad for 70 years, right? So this had to be in somebody's attic or in somebody's, basement somewhere who did not attend the games. And it was offered to me. I said, thank you very much. I'll take that. And it went right in the binder. It's protected with cardboard on the back. This is a very neat item. As you can see, you hardly ever get unused tickets from this era. I mean, this is going now 70 years old, these tickets. So it's hard to get tickets, period. And to get them full and unused is even more rare. So you could see the opponents right on the ticket. Chicago Cardinals, Philadelphia Eagles, New York Yanks. Yep, the Yanks had a football team. Washington Redskins, Cleveland Browns, Pittsburgh Steelers. So this is one of my favorite things in this entire booklet. Just super cool. And when I turn this page, we're going to do that very carefully. And here are some more tickets from that 1951 season. This is a September 20th, 1951 game against the Rams. Again, that fresh air fun that we just talked about, preseason game. Next, we have the Steelers down here, October the 1st, 1951 at Pittsburgh. Then we have game number 5 at the Polo Grounds, November the 18th. And just to kind of give you an idea of what was happening in 1951, we had a 9-2-1 record. The Rams, which we played in the preseason right here, the Rams were the NFL champions, and there were 12 teams in the league at this point. Turning the page, we now head to 1952. 1952, the Giants were 7-5. The Detroit Lions were the NFL champions in 1952. And we have a 7-5 record. In round 2, in the first round of the draft, the Giants pick Hall of Famer Frank Gifford. So this is kind of what started the Giants' hot streak here. I know we were 10-2 in 1950 and we made the playoffs and all that, but drafting Gifford was huge for this franchise. Obviously a Hall of Famer, great all-around player. Okay, we start 1952 with September the 14th, game at the Bears at Wrigley Field. Then we get to our fresh air fun game. Again, it's against the Rams, September the 18th, 1952. Then we move on to our annual game against the Cleveland Browns. This is in Cleveland, October the 12th. Then we come down here to the bottom. The following week, October the 19th. October the 26th at home, the Polo Grounds. And then one of my last tickets from that year is December the 7th, 1952, also at the Polo Grounds. And, now that we're talking about tickets that are over 70 years old, or getting close to 70 years old, it gets very difficult to get all of these tickets. So as the years go on, it gets more and more challenging to fill up the booklet. But we do the best we can. Okay, on to 1953. And in 1953, again, the Detroit Lions repeated as NFL champions. This was not a good season for the Giants. This was our worst season in the decade. We were 3-9, and because of that, this saw the end of the Steve Owen era as Giants head coach. So he was Giants head coach for 23 years. Great coach. Brought us a lot of victories. This was the last year of his tenure. Now, this first ticket in 1953 just is unbelievable for 1953. I mean, the colors, the pennants of every single team in the league. I believe every team should be on there. Maybe I had some over here that got cut off, but just every team with the pennant, the football players tackling each other, the script, the little scoreboard at the top. This was a very nicely done ticket for the Colts. And that was our first game, September the 12th, 1953. Then we come down here to game number 2, October the 25th, in the Polo Grounds. Then we slide over here to Comiskey Park, November the 1st, 1953. Then we come up here, November the 22nd, game number 4, Polo Grounds. And then we come down here to our annual game with the Browns, and that would be December the 6th. And we are looking at a total cost of $2.40. You can't get anything for $2.40 at a sporting event these days. So in 1953, we go 3-9. Again, this was Steve Owen's last game, December the 13th, 1953, versus the Lions, who were the NFL champions. But a good career. 1953 also saw the draft of Hall of Famer Rosie Brown in the 27th round of the draft. Yeah, 27th round out of Morgan State. Hall of Famer Rosie Brown, one of the great Giants of all time, was drafted in this year. So we had in back-to-back seasons 2 Hall of Famers, Frank Gifford, Rosie Brown. That should tell you all you need to know about the 50s. Okay, 1954, we start off our collection here with September the 12th, a game at Wrigley Field against the Bears. Then we come down here to Comiskey Park, September the 26th, 1954. This was against the Chicago Cardinals. So we had 2 Chicago games right here, kind of close to each other within 2 weeks. This was the debut of Jim Lee Howell, who was the coach in the 50s, and as you can see, he had a .663 career winning percentage with the Giants, 1 NFL title, 3 title appearances, another of the great coaches in Giants history. Okay, now we come up here to game number 1 at the Polo Grounds. That's October the 17th, $3.50, very nice. October the 24th, same $3.50, Polo Grounds, game number 2. Then we have our away game at the Cleveland Browns, a nice Halloween game there, October the 31st in Cleveland. Then we come down here to our away game at the Pittsburgh Steelers, November the 7th. Pretty nice looking ticket for 1954. And then over here we have November 21st, game number 4 in the Polo Grounds. Then up top left here we have game number 5, November the 28th. 1954. And that's the last ticket I have from 54. We wrapped up the season at 7-5. And there were still 12 teams in the league, as there will be for the remainder of this decade. So in 1954, we saw the Cleveland Browns become the NFL champions. So the Lions got dethroned. The Browns now were the champs. And we move on to 1955. In 1955, the first ticket I have is a nice one right here in Detroit against the Lions. This is September the 18th, Briggs Stadium right there in, I believe it's Detroit, Michigan. Exhibition football, sponsored by the Detroit Free Press. Okay. Then next we have September 24th, 1955 against the Eagles. That was the Connie Mack Stadium, the nice yellow ticket there. Then we have an away game here against the Steelers. They changed the ticket a little bit. This is October the 9th, 1955. Then we have game number 1 at the Polo Grounds, October the 16th. And we have game number 3 at the Polo Grounds, October the 30th. It's got a staple in it. I wonder how long that's been there. Then we have the annual away game at the Cleveland Browns, November the 6th, $3 for this ticket right here. Then we have game number 4, 1955 at the Polo Grounds. Game number 5. And game number 6. So we had three home games all in a row to wrap up the 55 season here for what I have in my book. And that was the final game at the Polo Grounds, and it ended up in a tie, 35-35, Giants and Browns. So the Giants and the Browns had an epic rivalry throughout the 50s, even into the into the 60s a little bit. But both teams were always super, super good. They were always at the top of the division, always fighting it out for the playoff spots. So this was the last game at the Polo Grounds. We would then move on to Yankee Stadium. But it's just apropos that the final game in the stadium in this era would end in a tie against one of our fiercest rivals at the time, the Cleveland Browns. Now, we move on to 1956, which... Oh, did I miss one? Yep, I missed one. Sorry about that. 1955, this would be the last game of the season away at Detroit, December 11th. So that last game that we just looked at was the last game at the Polo Grounds. This was the last game of the season here against Detroit. And in 1955, we ended up with a 6-5-1 record. So far in the coaching career of Howell, we have a 7-5 season, and we have a 6-5-1 season. So things were not looking so great. I mean, 13-10-1 is not super, super good, but now we get to one of the best seasons in Giants history, 1956. 1956 saw the debut of Sam Huff. He was drafted in the 3rd round out of West Virginia, another Hall of Famer. So that's 3 Hall of Famers drafted in this decade, and all within a span of 4 years. This right here is the first ticket from 1956. It is a preseason game against the Rams. Again, it seems like we played them every year. And this one was played on September the 1st. And it was played at the University of Washington Stadium. Figure that one out. Then right here, I don't have this ticket, but this was Sam Huff's debut game, October the 7th, 1956. This right here is one that I'm missing as well. This is game 1 of 1956. This is the first game at Yankee Stadium. That would be a big Giants victory right there and a start of something great for this season. Then game 2 is October the 28th. The next game is at the Steelers. Then the following week, we came up here to game 3, Yankee Stadium. We're looking at $4 for a lower reserve ticket in 1956. Then we have at the Redskins, right here. Game number 5, December the 2nd. Game number 6, December the 9th. So these tickets in 56 are super difficult to come by because this was the year that the Giants won the championship. They were 8-3-1, but they just absolutely demolished the Chicago Bears in the championship game, which is this lovely piece of history right here. 1956 World's Championship game. It is a $5 ticket for the championship game. So a little bit different than today's ticket for the Super Bowl. I think the tickets went for like $1,500 this year for one ticket. So this was, as you can see, 1956 NFL Championship, 47-7, just demolition of the Chicago Bears. This was on December the 30th, 1956. A lot of people didn't even see this game because it was blacked out, because baseball was super popular back then. Football was just starting to catch on a little bit, but it didn't really get really popular until a couple of years later, which we will get to shortly. So that is one of my favorite tickets. This is one of the greatest championship games the Giants ever played. Usually our championship games are nail biters and it comes down to the last second or a missed field goal or something crazy, but this was one of the greatest Giants games ever. 47-7. Okay, so we win the championship in 56. Now we move on to 57. In 57, we come off our championship season with a 7-5 record. So not really a super, follow-up. Our first game that I have is October 27th, 1957, a home game at Yankee Stadium. Then I actually have one down here. I just put it in this lower part of the page so the top didn't stick out over the binder. But this was game 1, October the 20th, 1957. So this was first. Then came game 2. Then we have this game against the Eagles. This was October the 5th. A nice ticket for 1957 at the Eagles. Then game number 3 at home, November the 10th. Game number 4, November the 17th. Game number 5, December the 1st. Game number 6, December the 15th. And like I said, in 1957, we had a 7-5 record, so not very good. We did not make the playoffs. The Detroit Lions were the champs in 1957, so that was their 3rd title in the 50s, a outstanding decade for the Lions. So this decade really consisted of the Giants, the Lions, the Browns, and the Colts at the end, right? So those were the 4 teams that pretty much dominated the 50s. Okay, 1958, another very good season for our Giants. We had a 9-3 record. We made the playoffs, which we'll get to shortly, but this is the first ticket that I have from this 1958 season. This is October the 5th at the Eagles at University of Pennsylvania Franklin Field. That was the first game that I have there. Then game number 1 at Yankee Stadium right here, October the 19th. Then our annual away game against the Cleveland Browns, November the 2nd, $2.50. Lovely. Then we have game number 3, November the 9th. Game number 4, November the 23rd. And then we have the Detroit Lion game. And again, the Lions were just coming off their championship season. They were very good back then. This was a game that we played December the 7th, 1958. And that is the final game that I have from the regular season, 1958. Now, the way that 1958 ended up was the Giants and the Browns ended up with the same record. And they were in the same division. So what happens? They have to play a playoff game, a divisional playoff game, an Eastern Conference playoff game. And that's what happened. The winner of that game went on to the championship. This is the ticket to that Eastern Conference playoff game, December the 21st, 1958. This is a very rare occurrence because most of the time the best team just went to the championship game. So these games, these tickets from these games are far and few between. You don't see many of these. And this was the first playoff game, which we won, and we advanced to the championship game. We beat the Browns 10-0, and then we played the greatest game ever played, and it's right here, 1958 World's Championship between the Giants and the Baltimore Colts. And this is the game, the famous game that everybody says put pro football on the map. This was the very first overtime game in NFL history because up until this point, every game that was tied at the end of regulation just ended up with a tie. There was no overtime. Games just, stopped and that was it. But because this was a championship game, they could not obviously end it in a tie. They had to have a winner. So this was the first overtime game. People were tuning in on their television sets trying to see what was going to happen. The Colts went down the field in the overtime. Unitas gave to Amici, and they scored at the end of the game, and they were the world champions. So it was not a great situation for the Giants, but it did put pro football on the map, this game right here. And this is one of the hardest tickets to get as a Giants football ticket stub collector. This is like the Holy Grail of the collection right here. So I'm very proud to have that, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. So 1958, we lost in the championship game, and we move on to our final decade of the 50s, or our final year of the 50s, 1959. Another good year for the Giants, 10-2. This was the way that it started. August the 15th, 1959, at the Eagles, Hershey Stadium, preseason game. Then we come down here, September the 11th, 1959, against the Bears. Another preseason game. And then we start our regular schedule. October the 4th, 1959, at the Eagles, Franklin Field, I believe. Yes, Franklin Field. Then we come over here, Giants-Browns, October the 11th, 1959. Then game number 1 at Yankee Stadium, October the 18th. Then game number 2, November the 1st. Then game number 3, November the 8th. Game number 4, November the 15th. Game number 5, November the 29th. And game number 6, December the 6th. So as you see, I have almost every single home game. I think I'm only missing about 15 home game tickets from 1950 to the present day. So I have almost all of them. It's the away tickets that are a little tricky or are more difficult to come by. But as we get to the end of 1959, we did make the playoffs. We played the Colts in this game right here. This was the World Championship game of 1959. This, I think, is one of the coolest tickets. Just the colors and the graphics and everything like that for 1959. And this ticket right here is almost a full one, as you can see. This is the part of the ticket that usually would get torn off. But in this particular situation, they tore off this end, so it's really a nice tear. You could kind of see the date and World's 1959 championship and the whole deal right here. So this is one of my favorite tickets that I have. Just to close out the decade, we did lose this game as well, 31-16. And there is a very cool summary of this game on YouTube. You can kind of watch the highlights. It's about 20 minutes. And the Giants did lose by 15 points, but they were in this game for most of it. It just kind of like came apart at the end. You know, just a couple of bad decisions at the end of the game there. But we did finish the season 10-2. We lost to the Colts. And this is the yellow variety of the championship ticket. And I also happen to have this one right here. This is the blue variety of the same game. So I'm assuming that where you were sitting, they changed the color of the ticket. Just a little nice touch for the championship game. This was a lower ticket in the lower tier. And this would be the other half of the ticket that got torn off of the other one. So this is the blue variety right here in the lower tier. This is the left-hand side of the ticket. And then once again, this is the yellow, which is the right side of the ticket, and this is the upper. So yeah, so yellow was the upper tier, blue is the lower tier, and that kind of takes care of our 1950s. Again, a just phenomenal decade by the Giants. So I really, really hoped you enjoyed watching this video. This is my favorite decade, and just so many cool tickets and memories from this decade. Hall of Famers, championships, playoffs, just really, really great history. If you're a New York Giant fan and you haven't learned or you haven't looked back at the 50s, check it out. It's really a great decade to look back and see the memories of this decade, kind of like how it all started for our favorite team here. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. We're almost done with our series here. I have a couple more decades to go, but we're kind of getting towards the end here. So I hope you like what you see. I hope you enjoy the content. Leave a comment below, like the channel, subscribe, and I will talk to you next time. Go Big Blue.